Last month, the nearest star to the Earth was in California.
Yeah, that's pushing the creative limits of what you would call a star.
In a laboratory, for the first time, the world's largest lasers forced atoms of hydrogen to fuse together in the same kind of energy-producing reaction that fires the sun.
That's a little confusing. I was under the impression that fusion had been done in the lab for over 50 years.
It lasted less than a billionth of a second, but after 6 decades of toil and failure, the Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory proved it could be done.
Actually, I think there might have been an incident like this some time ago where they got energy out of hydrogen. You know, when the nearest star to Earth was Bikini Atoll.
If fusion becomes commercial power one day, it would be endless and carbon-free.
That's bizarre. That sounds like he actually believes that they're trying to build a fusion power station here, rather than, say, for instance, just do nuclear weapons research in the lab.
In other words, it would change human destiny.
Well, yeah, I suppose nuclear weapons research does change human destiny.
As you'll see, there's far to go, but after December's breakthrough, we were invited to tour the lab and meet the team that brought star power down to Earth.
Bizarre that he's still not mentioned that it's nuclear weapons research that he's looking at here, which also seemed to be a common feature of most of the reporting on this announcement. But don't worry, I've got an immense underground sting operation that will reveal to you in absolute detail that only the best journalists could have possibly worked out that that's true. But we'll come to that later.
The National Ignition Facility, or NIF, was built for $3.5 billion to ignite self-sustaining fusion.
Yep, that's the sort of money you would expect for nuclear weapons research.
Last month, the laser shot fired from this control room put 2 units of energy into the experiment, atoms began fusing, and about 3 units of energy came out.
Yeah, whereas about 50 years ago, you could put 1 unit of energy into a nuclear explosion and get 100 out by fusion. Something called a hydrogen bomb.
Put 2 units of energy into the experiment, atoms began fusing, and about 3 units of energy came out.
Well, that's it then. We're done. That's fusion. More energy out than you put in. So just strap a power station around the outside and you're done. An almost limitless supply of clean energy. Yeah, I somehow suspect that this might not be entirely the story, that they might be missing out some crushingly important details. I mean, let's just do some ballpark feel numbers here. How much energy are we talking about?
About 2 megajoules in, about 3 megajoules out.
Well, those are remarkably easy numbers to visualize because it takes about 2 megajoules to boil a liter of water. Well, that's basically the energy it takes to run a kettle for 15 minutes. So we're going to have enough energy to run a kettle for 10 minutes, quarter of an hour, that sort of thing. What are we going to do with that?
First, there's the energy required, which is delivered by lasers in these tubes that are longer than a football field.
Each one of these lasers is one of the most energetic in the world, and you have 192 of them.
And you're going to run all of that off the power it takes to run a kettle for 10 minutes.
All that wallop vaporizes a target nearly too small to see.
Can I hold this thing?
Absolutely. So let it go, and there we go.
Unbelievable.
Unrelated real science note here, actually. It's always amusing to see multi-billion-dollar facilities, because this is how real science works, using practical stuff to get things to work. So it looks like what they've got here is just a Sharpie, an empty Sharpie, with a valve attached to it, with a standard lure lock fitting, and just a regular syringe needle that's been ground flat. That's what they're going to be using to handle their fusion beads.
So these need to be as close to perfect as humanly possible.
That's right. That's right. And we do think there are among the most perfect items that we have on Earth.
Yeah, this isn't an energy production research facility.
move them together, and then we apply glue using a hair.
A hair.
Yeah, usually something like an eyelash or a similar, or a cat whisker.
I like this guy. You see, again, practical scientist talking here. When I was making my microjet nozzles.
That's nice, that's nice. Almost there. Almost there. When it's just about to close, so it's about there, you just pull. Nice and gentle pull until it actually solidifies.
When you've got to sort of calibrate how big they are, one of the easiest calibration standards that you have is the human hair, which is about 1/10 of a millimeter or 100 microns in diameter.
There I've got a calibration slide under a microscope. That's 1 millimeter there. Alright, there's your typical human hair who clocks in at just under 100 microns. That sort of thing. You're going to need to have to put a scratch on here at about the right distance, at about the right position. What I reckon is going to be about... there. Good. So we've got one nice little scratch on there. So you have to lick that. Break it. There you go, there's a human hair. You should find that you have a capillary that's about 100 microns. Actually slightly less, it's about 50. Cool. That's all there is to it.
So yeah, when I see other scientists using human hairs to do stuff, I like it.
One physicist said, "You should see the target we blasted December 5th," which made us ask, could we? Cylinder was blasted to oblivion. The copper support that held it was peeled backward.
Yeah, spoiler. If you were to put anything at the focus of that laser, it would look like this.
The explosion on the end of this was hotter than the sun.
It was hotter than the center of the sun. We were able to achieve temperatures that were the hottest in the entire solar system.
Yeah, what do they say? 2 units in, 3 out? So even if there was no fusion whatsoever, this would have still been basically one of the hottest objects in the solar system. It's going to explode pretty spectacularly.
Temperatures that were the hottest in the entire solar system.
Which would make an astronomical change in electric power.
How exactly?
This assembly goes into a blue vacuum chamber 3 stories tall. It's hard to see here because it's bristling with lasers and instruments.
I don't see any way of capturing any of this energy, let alone actually turning it into something useful.
Unlike today's nuclear plants, which split atoms apart, fusing them is many times more powerful.
Is it though? Let's do a little fact checking on that, shall we? Splitting up your usual uranium nucleus by fission will release about 200 million electron volts of energy. The most accessible hydrogen fusion reaction, fusing deuterium and tritium, will release about 18 mega electron volts of energy. On a per reaction basis, or on a per nuclei basis, fission produces much more energy than fusion. But what if we do it on a mass basis? Well, deuterium weighs 2 and tritium 3, so that would be 5 grams of stuff produces the equivalent of 18 odd million electron volts. Whereas you would need 230 grams of uranium to produce the 200 mega electron volts. Equivalent. So if you go by grammar fuel, hydrogen fusion is about 3 times better than splitting uranium. But you need to fuse a lot of hydrogen atoms to get the same energy as splitting 1 uranium atom.
With little long-term radiation, and it's easy to turn off, so no meltdowns.
Not entirely true, as anyone who knows about the Castle Bravo screw-up will know. You see, all power stations are just glorified water boilers. The problem with nuclear power stations, of course, is you're producing particles that are about 1 million times more energetic than, say, burning gas. The practical upshot is the difference between running comfortably and melting down is only like a factor of 2 in energy, and that's much more difficult to contain when you're dealing with things that generate so much energy. But once you achieve ignition, of course, you can actually get a runaway, especially if you don't understand the physics particularly well, which is what happened with Castle Bravo. There was a fusion reaction that wasn't really expected. The practical upshot was the nuclear weapon was meant to detonate at about 5 megatons, and actually detonated with about 15 megatons, and was one of the larger nuclear disasters in history. Now, of course, you'll never get a fusion reactor to blow up like a hydrogen bomb, because that would mean you would need all of the fuel there and to have it all react all at once. But then again, that same thing is true for a fission reactor.
We estimate between 2 and 4 megatons. Everything within a 30-kilometer radius will be completely destroyed.
Yeah, that's bullshit.
Material in all of the cores will be ejected at force and dispersed by a massive shockwave,
That's especially bullshit.
which will extend approximately 200 kilometers and likely be fatal to the entire population of Kiev, as well as a portion of Minsk.
Yeah, a fission reactor cannot blow up like a nuclear bomb. You need a precise geometry of fissile material and microsecond timing to get those to work. However, with bad reactor design, you can get your reactor to produce a few times more power than you expect, at which point the reactor just melts, and it's not really that functional as a reactor after it melts.
How many shots do you take in a day?
Take your time. Oh, God. You want me to?
How many shots?
Choose life.
We take, on average, a little more than 1 shot per day.
If this was theoretically a commercial power plant, how many shots a day would be required?
Approximately 10 shots per second would be required.
Okay, let's do the basic maths on that. What did they say? It was about, it was a couple of megajoules coming out of each shot, right?
About 2 megajoules in, about 3 megajoules out.
So 10 shots in a second would be about 20 megajoules. 20 megajoules in 1 second is 20 megawatts. How does that compare to, say, well, let's just compare it to a benchmark of the largest power stations in the world that make about 20,000 megawatts, with regular power stations being about 10 times smaller than this. So 10 shots per second was 20 megawatts. So to get up to a sensible sized power station of 2,000 megawatts, you would need about 1,000 shots per second or 60,000 shots per minute. The reason I go per minute is because the world's fastest firing in-service machine gun fires about 6,000 rounds per minute. So the rate of fire that you'll be looking at is basically 10 or so of these firing pellets into your vacuum chamber. And that's, of course, going on the basis that the energy required to actually make a shot was the energy it takes to run a kettle for about 10 minutes, which, as we'll see, isn't quite true.
And the other big challenge, of course, is not just increasing the repetition rate, but also getting the gain out of the targets to go up to about a factor of 100.
Yeah, they just explained why this isn't and will never be a power generating facility. But let's just lowball it for the moment and go for the goal of 10 shots per second. 10 times per second is basically 1,000,000 shots per day versus their current 1 shot per day. But I'm going to give them that for free. I'm going to say that's a solved problem, that they can get 1,000,000 shots per day out of this, and that'll never burn out the windows or anything. That's never going to happen. But whatever, I'm going to call it a solved problem. And I'm going to call it a solved problem that they can focus all of those lasers with micron precision on a tiny target 10 times per second. I'm going to call all of those solved problems. But there's an intrinsic problem here. You're still firing 10 pellets per second into a vacuum chamber. And you're going to be adding material to that at the rate of about 1 gram per second. Then vaporizing that into the vacuum chamber. Basically, it's not going to be a vacuum chamber for long. It's just going to fill up with the crap that you're throwing into it. This is before we come to the minor caveat of,
but also getting the gain out of the targets to go up to about a factor of 100.
yeah, well, 60 Minutes never gets around to telling us that this facility has nothing to do with making fusion power stations.
Remember December's breakthrough put 2 units of energy in and got 3 out?
It does eventually get around to telling us that the whole 2 units in, 3 units out ain't quite true.
Well, it took 300 units of power to fire the lasers. By that standard, it was 300 in, 3 out. That detail was not front and center at the Department of Energy's December news conference.
And it's not really exactly a breakthrough achieving ignition. This was done on a semi-regular basis by something called nuclear weapons testing, before it was banned and people had to look at other avenues of exploring nuclear weapons research. But anyway, I promised you the deep undercover sting that would get inside the deep state and expose what they are not telling you, about this being a nuclear weapons research facility, which I did by looking at their website. So what do we got at the Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory National Ignition Facility? NIF is a key element in the National Nuclear Security Administration's science-based stockpile stewardship program. That's basically looking after nuclear weapons.
The thing is, in 1992, the U.S. stopped nuclear testing. So if we can't test them, how do we assure our government, our allies, and our adversaries that these weapons won't fail if they're needed?
Where if we go to science, you'll see there first is stockpile stewardship, high energy density science, advanced weapon physics. Yeah, not seeing a lot here about making a fusion power station. But even if I hadn't done this, I could have just watched their press conference.
Today's announcement is a huge step forward to the president's goal of achieving commercial fusion within a decade.
More immediately, this achievement will advance our national security in at least 3 ways. First, it will lead to laboratory experiments that help NNSA defense programs continue to maintain confidence in our deterrent without nuclear explosive testing.
Now, I gotta say, I like this guy. I like this guy a lot, especially on the basis of his honesty.
Second, it underpins the credibility of our deterrent by demonstrating world-leading expertise in weapons-relevant technologies. Third, continuing to assure our allies that we know what we're doing and continuing to avoid testing will advance our non-proliferation goals, also increasing our national security.
Now, oddly enough, I don't actually have too much trouble with this just being a nuclear weapons research facility. Remember how I said earlier that a nuclear power station cannot blow up like a bomb, because bombs need very precise geometries and microsecond timings, and anything goes slightly wrong with that, and you don't get a boom, you get a fizzle. Or just nothing at all. If that fissile material isn't kept away from the atmosphere, it will corrode, creating layers of corrosion that will increase the likelihood of a fizzle. It can also warp the metal, also increasing the likelihood of a fizzle. The nuclear material also slowly self-irradiates, eventually building up isotopes that can poison the pit. Again, basically stopping the nuke from being a nuke. The neutron initiators tend to be honkingly radioactive stuff that has a very short shelf life, and if they're not maintained, no initiator, no nuclear explosion. Give or take, the US has about 4,000 nuclear weapons, about half of them waiting to be dismantled. And all in, it spends about $30 billion maintaining them. Give or take, that's about $10 million per nuclear weapon per year. This is also the reason why it's entirely possible that Russia doesn't have any functioning nuclear weapons. The Soviet Union broke up some 30 years ago, and the recent invasion has showed us that the corruption has clearly been funneling money out of the maintenance of their conventional army. Well, if siphoning money out of the military on conventional stuff is easy, siphoning it out of nuclear weapon maintenance is a no-brainer. I mean, they're never going to be used anyway, so boom, you can just pocket $10 million per nuclear weapon per year. And of course, no one will ever find out unless someone is crazy enough to push the button.
I know what you're thinking. Did he fire 6 shots or only 5?
Yeah, there is a very good chance that there are no functioning nuclear weapons in Russia.
But Ian, this is a 44 Magnum, the most powerful handgun in the world, and would blow your head clean off.
But I don't see anyone itching to find out.
You've got to ask yourself one question. Do I feel lucky? Well, do you, punk?
Power resides where men believe it resides. It's a trick, a shadow on the wall.
Nothing.
And a very small man can cast a very large shadow.
Yep, in a world where no one is willing to call your bluff, the belief that you have nuclear weapons is actually as effective as having them. And the illusion of having nuclear weapons is a damn sight cheaper than actually maintaining them.
Second, it underpins the credibility of our deterrent by demonstrating world-leading expertise in weapons-relevant technologies.
Yeah, this had diddly squat to do with fusion as a power source.
Was built for $3.5 billion to ignite self-sustaining fusion.
Or any of that other bullshit fluff.
If fusion becomes commercial power one day, it would be endless and carbon-free.
But if you step back from the fact that this is a weapons research facility and past all of the bullshit about this being a fusion energy breakthrough that's going to give us all free energy, on a practical level, this was still a remarkable achievement.
192 laser beams entered from the 2 ends of the cylinder and struck the inner wall. That happened in less time than it takes light to move 10 feet. X-rays from the wall impinged on the spherical capsule. Fusion fuel in the capsule got squeezed. Fusion reactions started. The energy production took less time than it takes light to travel 1 inch.
As for funding nuclear weapons research by the back door, well, this ain't exactly new, and has been ragged on in popular culture going way back.
In collaboration with the best scientific brains at its disposal, what can Hercules do? It can send at the press of a button enough power to destroy any foreign body on a collision course with our planet.
And it highlights some uncomfortable truths about how humans progress.
Hercules is an armed orbiting satellite. Its nuclear weaponry aimed toward outer space.
Right name, wrong direction.
And how it isn't always done for virtuous reasons. The space program was, of course, a barely concealed weapons delivery program, and GPS, of course, was developed mostly to accurately target missiles anywhere on Earth. Putting men onto the moon was mostly a schlong measuring contest between the two, at the time, nuclear superpowers. That is, one of the most iconic moments in human history was basically born out of a schlong measuring contest. Humans are complex. And that's today's video. Hope you found it interesting. If you did, maybe drop a thumbs up on it. Consider subscribing so you don't miss out on more interesting stuff like this. And as ever, if you really like the work of this channel and want to support it directly, you can do it through Patreon. Thanks for watching.